Participants, respected guests, it is the beginning of 1 week national webinar on National Education Policy 2020. I invite Professor Minikuti, Head of the Department, School of Pedagogical Science, Mahatma Gandhi University, for delivering the introductory remark and welcome address. Minikuti, ma'am.
Chancellor, NEPA, New Delhi, Professor N.V. Varghese, respected Professor Vasudha Kamath, Member NEP 2020 Draft Committee, and former Vice Chancellor, SNDT Women's University, the program coordinator of the webinar, Professor Dr. T.V. Tulasidaran, dear faculty of School of Pedagogical Sciences, Professor Asha J.V., Professor Jaya Jais, Dr. Sajna Jalil, Dr. Ismail Tamarisheri, and Dr. Sibuji Netto, and Dr. Mohammed Kevi, my dear participants, students, and friends. A warm good morning to you all. Today, School of Pedagogical Sciences is organizing a 5-day webinar, that is from today to now 6th November 2020, a national webinar on National Education Policy 2020. Providing universal access to quality education is the key to India's continued ascent on the global stage in terms of economic growth. High quality education is the best way for developing and maximizing rich talent of India. So our ability to provide high quality educational opportunities to the students will determine the future of our country. So the National Education Policy 2020 aims at making India a global knowledge superpower. We can discuss the different aspects of NEP during these coming days. Then coming to my duty, Professor Sabu Thomas, Honorable Vice Chancellor of Mahatma Gandhi University, he is an eminent scholar and academician who needs no introduction. His academic activities are spread all over the world, and his expertise has been utilized by various universities in India and abroad. Professor Dr. Sabu Thomas is a renowned scientist in the field of nanoscience and nanotechnology. He is a Fellow of Royal Society of Chemistry, London, Fulbright Fellow, USA, Professor of University of Lorraine, France. Professor Sabu Thomas has got quite a large number of patents in his credits in the field of chemistry, nanoscience, and nanotechnology. Recently, in the ranking of top 2% scientists from India released by Stanford University, USA, our Honorable Vice Chancellor has been ranked second in the area of polymer science. Is another feather in his cap. So this is a proud moment for all of us. On behalf of School of Pedagogical Sciences, I congratulate our Honorable Vice Chancellor for this great achievement. So he has agreed, in spite of his busy schedule, to spare his valuable time for this inaugural function. But Professor Tulasidaran informed that he will join us later. This our Professor Sabu Thomas will join us later. But on behalf of School of Pedagogical Sciences, I extend a hearty welcome to our Honorable Vice Chancellor to this inaugural session of the webinar. Our key person of this session is Professor N.V. Varghese and Professor Vasudha Kamath. Professor N.V. Varghese is currently the Vice Chancellor of National University of Educational Planning and Administration, New Delhi. He was the founder director of the Center for Policy Research in Higher Education. He was in charge of developing methodologies of decentralized planning and was leading activities associated with educational planning. He has directed several national and international research projects, carried out research projects in several countries of Africa, Asia, Latin America, and published more than 30 books in research and research reports, and more than 200 research papers and articles in different academic journals in the area related to educational planning, financing, and higher education. So in spite of his busy schedule, he was kind enough to spare his valuable time with us for this national webinar, first day of national webinar. So I welcome you, sir, to this function. Professor Vasudha Kamath is well-known for her significant contribution to the field of education and technology, educational technology, information and communication technology in education. She is nominated by MHRD, Government of India, in the National Education Policy Draft Committee under the chairmanship of Dr. Kasturi Rangan in June 2017. She was the Vice Chancellor of SNDT Women's University during the years 2011 to 16. She is the recipient of Best Teacher Award by Maharashtra State Government, Fulbright Senior Research Fellowship for conducting research in USA, Rotary International Fellowship, during which she taught the UITM Malaysia. Presently, she is the trustee of Life Insurance Corporation, Golden Jubilee Foundation. She is working as independent director of Indocore Remedies Limited, Mumbai. Madam, we are very lucky to have an expert to hear you. So I extend a hearty welcome to you, madam, to this August function.
Kerala.
Oh, Kerala. Hello.
I welcome all the participants and my dear colleagues, my dear students, to this function. Thank you all.
Thank you, Professor Minikuti A, for your wonderful welcome address. It is the time for inaugural address. Professor T.V. Tulasiran sir, our Honorable VC, Professor Sabu Thomas sir, has joined or not?
He will join later. In the meantime, we can start.
Then,
Okay.
Yeah. Okay,
Okay.
dear guests,
okay.
delegates,
So we
participants. Now we are moving to the keynote address of this webinar. Our beloved guest, Honorable Professor N.V. Varghese sir, will deliver a talk on National Education Policy 2020, broader linking issues related to governance. Sir, please, Professor N.V. Varghese.
Professor Minikuti
I hope you can hear me.
Yes, sir. You are audible.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. And Professor Minikuti, head of the department, SPS, Professor Tulasidaran, who was instrumental in contacting us, all of us. And above all, Professor Kamath, it's indeed a great pleasure and a great honor for me to be present here and to discuss some of the issues related to the new education policy. Since we are starting late, can you tell me till what time I can go? I will adjust my talk accordingly. Professor Tulasidaran? No. Yes, please. Can you tell me till what time? Since you are starting late.
Sir, I'm not getting you properly. I am not getting properly, sir.
Okay. Sorry, I could not hear you. I could not hear you. It's
Yes.
okay. Let us not waste time on this issue. Let us go. Let us go ahead.
Yes, sir.
It's once again thanking you for inviting me to discuss and share some of the issues related to higher education, and especially when Madam Kamath is around, she has been party to all the discussions and the deliberations related to most of the issues that we are going to discuss in the context of the new education policy. Friends, I would like to make 2 or 3 introductory comments before I come to specific issues related to higher education and the new higher education in the new policy. First and foremost is that this is the third education policy that India is having. And this is the first policy where we feel that the policy is talking about an expanding higher education system. 1968 policy and 86 policy were not so much keen about the expansion of the system. In fact, the 1986 policy talked about dealing with degrees from jobs, which was indirectly an indication that we are expanded too much and therefore we should consolidate and reduce the rush for the students to come to higher education and enroll in itself. But that is not the case in this policy. This policy puts a target of expansion of higher education, which I'll come to it later. The second dimension that I would like to mention is that the earlier policies were framed at a time when state was one of the dominant forces, both in directing, managing, and financing higher education in the country. But that is not the case now. From the turn of this century, a trend that we find very significantly in India is that the fast expansion of the sector is due to the fast expansion of the private sector or private institutions in India. Say, for example, in this century, we started with a low enrollment ratio of around 8.2 or 3 and around 8 or 8.4 million students in the universities and colleges. And we find that this was the expansion that has taken place in more than 50 years. However, in the last 17 or 18 years, the expansion was much faster. It was on an exponential rate at 2-digit levels, bringing the total enrollment to 37 million plus and a gross enrollment ratio of 26, So this is a great achievement, but this achievement is possible mostly because of the proliferation of private higher education institutions. So this was not a situation that we are talking about. The third dimension is that India has reached a stage of massification of higher education. Normally, globally and internationally. If the system crosses 15% of the gross enrollment ratio, then we talk about a massified higher education system. So in other words, the question that is posed now is that how do we manage a massifying higher education system? So for example, in Kerala, if you consider the primary schooling system is a contracting system. The number of students in primary education is declining. And that is not the case with higher education. It's an expanding system. So how do we manage an expanding system? The second dimension is that how do we manage an expanding system with a dominance of market? Or in other words, the question is that how do we manage markets and massification? And that is the issue. So when you're talking about management and governance of higher education, this trend is very important. Coming specifically to the policy, this policy talks about the expansion of the system. That means ER will be increased to 50% by the year 2035. It talks about multidisciplinary education. It talks about flexible pathways to learning. And it talks about diversified institutional structure and consolidation of institutions and new governance structure and also the new approach to internationalization. These are the elements to be governed. These are the elements to be managed. So when you're talking about management of the system, higher education system, in the context of the new policy, these are the dimensions to be taken into account. Now, first, let me go by one. If you are talking about the expansion of the system, when new policy is talking about 50% gross enrollment ratio for higher education, it shows a matured system of higher education. Or in other words, it is a stage of universalization of higher education. You'll find that all the developing countries have already universalized higher education. Therefore, in our move towards a developed country, identifying India as a developed country, it becomes necessary that we have a very well developed and strong and sustainable higher education system. And then this is the meaning of 50% of gross enrollment ratio, the target of 50%. That means universalization of higher education. Now, when we put this target, how do we manage? We have a system whereby 78% of the higher education institutions are in the private sector and 66% of the enrollment are in the private sector. And if you take Kerala specifically, nearly 82% of the enrollment are in the private sector, which includes aided and unaided. And under such a situation, how do we manage the system? So expansion. What is the role of the state, or what's the capacity of the state to be effective in dealing with the expansion processes? There's a funding and financing arrangements that is provided by the state will not be sufficient to carry forward the expansion plans that it has. So the question is that what will be the sharing of the responsibilities? What will be the sharing of the resources between the state and the center? So for example, in 1968 policy, we said that 6% of the GDP should be sent for higher education. And we repeated the same thing in 1986. Even today, we have not reached more than 66% of that target. That means we are even today around 4% of the GDP that is being sent. The CAB committee of 2005 indicated that we should spend at least 2% of the GDP for higher education, and we have not reached that stage. One trend that we find in most of the cases is that this trend of increasing private sector involvement in higher education and expansion as a result of that is taking place in most of the states. And especially in the southern states, especially in Andhra Pradesh, in Telangana, in Tamil Nadu, and Karnataka, and the western state of Maharashtra. What one finds is that especially in the technical and professional courses, you find a substantial presence of the private sector and private institutions. It has two implications so far as management or governance of the higher education system is concerned. Many of these institutions are single discipline or single faculty institutions. You have a large number of engineering institutions, good number of medical institutions, and a good number of B.Ed institutions. If you are going for a multidisciplinary orientation to education, what does it mean? From the management and governance point of view, it has another problem. Since many of these institutions are in the private sector, what is the efficacy? What is the mechanism? What are the modalities for the state sector to intervene to make it multidisciplinary, So that is very, very, very important. Why I'm making this point is that many of the suggestions made in the policy will not be materialized within a year or two. That is to be noticed. Say, for example, in 1968 policy, we said that we will adopt a 10+2+3 system. And you can imagine that the amount of time that was taken in Kerala to see that +2 is brought to another school system. It took nearly 22 years in Kerala to bring the +2 system to the school sector, It was part of the college sector, So therefore, I presume that this policy also will take a long period of time. It will take a long period of time to materialize and realize many of the objectives that are put. Now, there is a question related to the issue of consolidation, institutional consolidation. The policy talks about 3,000 students per institution over a period of time. And unfortunately, we find in India that many institutions are small in size. There are more than 2,600 colleges in India where you find that the total enrollment is 100 or less than 100. There are more than 26,000 institutions in India where you find that enrollment is between 500 to 600. Now, when we talk about these institutions to be consolidated, or each institution will be having at least 3,000 students as a basic minimum enrollment. What does that mean? It implies a lot of things in terms of reorganization. It has a lot of implications for managing the system. It has a lot of implications so far as consolidation and governance of the system. And especially when we are talking about a system that is very large and a system where public and private sector coexist. This is very important in Kerala. So for example, in Kerala, one trend that we find is that after 1980s, the government institutions, the growth of government institutions were rather slow. And many institutions or colleges that came up were mostly in the private sector, not even aided sector, mostly at the unaided sector, So how do we make this consolidation possible in a system whereby public and private sector coexist, operate, and perhaps in a system where private sector is a dominant sector? It's a management, it's a governance question. It is not only a question of financing, but also a question related to management. How will we request the private institutions to make it multidisciplinary? Because many of them operate on the basis of the surpluses that can be produced. I'm not using the term profit, but indirectly it is a profit. But it operates on the basis of the market forces, and they are offering mostly the courses which have marketability and employability. Otherwise, they will not get students and they will not be able to levy heavy fees or high fees, And that is the bread and butter question for their survival, existence, and continuation. So this is another question that is related to governance and management. Now, if I come to the questions related to the new governance model, which is very important, and we are talking about India has around 16 to 17 regulatory bodies in higher education. We are moving to a situation whereby there will be only one body that is called HECI, Higher Education Commission of India. And there will be only all higher education institutions of all types, except legal studies and medical education will be brought under HECI. And this HECI will be having 4 verticals. I think that will be the structure which will be very important for us to guide our regulatory arrangements and also for governance and management of the system. And the first one, NHERC, will be the regulatory body, that will be talking about, and that will be the regulator for all higher education, whether it is private or public. And this will be a new arrangement. And it is yet to be worked out, the details regarding how this will be facilitated and what will be the linkage between different types of arrangements, when we have these type of expansion that is taking place, and also the regulatory body. So when it is said that it is a light but tight regulation, what does it mean? What will happen to the other regulatory bodies? How these linkages between specialized areas will be established and how that will be coordinated will remain a major challenge. A second issue is related to meta accreditation body that will be set up. Today we have a system whereby there is one NAC, National Accreditation Agency, located in Bangalore. Although it was established in 1994, what one finds is that only around 1/3 of the universities and less than 20% of the colleges are accredited now. One can argue that accreditation did not take place, partly because there are no institutional capacity to accredit the institutions. That can be only a partial answer to that. Perhaps more important question is that if you are in a position to, or if you are in a situation of creating institutional capacity to accredit, perhaps the number of institutions brought under the accreditation bodies will be increasing. Perhaps this is the expectation. What we are suggesting more is different accreditation institutions and a national accreditation council. This, I go for meetings in Council for Higher Education Accreditation in USA every year. And what I find is that there are 42 or 43 accreditation bodies there or institutions there in different states. And there is one council of accreditation that you find located in Washington. Ours is more or less coming to that situation in the sense that we'll be having different accreditation bodies located in different states and regions. Say, for example, the state councils of higher education, like the State Council of Higher Education Kerala, they have initiated steps to see that most of these things are, the accreditation processes can be taken over by the state councils. The State Councils of Higher Education is an offshoot of 1986 policy. And if they are academically strengthened, there is a possibility that they can be vibrant accreditation institutions. How this will unravel itself, what will be the nature of the future of accreditation processes and procedures that will be followed will be decided at a later stage. However, there is a need to identify these accreditation institutions and establish the link or the networks between these institutions and the National Accreditation Council. That will be the way that higher education accreditation process and procedures will be organized. This is substantially different from the way in which accreditation process and procedures are organized now. Also, it has a lot of implication for how do we measure success of different institutions. At present, the accreditation process, we have 7 domains which are measured, and therefore it is important to see that whether we will retain this or we will change this. And how are we taking into account institutions with differential infrastructure facilities and locational advantages or disadvantages? These are some of the issues. Once you decentralize the accreditation process and procedures, we can make it local specific. But at the same time, even when you regionalize it, or even when we make the accreditation process localized, there should be a minimum comparable degree of quality that is assured in each case. Therefore, there is a need for a mechanism from the National Accreditation Council to ensure that the accreditation done by different agencies or different institutions are comparable. Or in other words, there is a need for a certification role that National Accreditation Council needs to develop and try to ensure and try to implement. Why it is important? Otherwise, the accreditation done in one state or in one region will be different from the accreditation done by in another place, and this may not lead to an overall improvement in the quality of education, higher education in India in general, and also there is a possibility that some states may lag dramatically behind other states in terms of accreditation processes and procedures. And therefore, there is a need for developing guidelines. There is a need for developing mechanisms to develop comparability between the accreditation processes, procedures, and the measurements which are used in assessment of different institutions. The third one, vertical, is related to Higher Education Grants Council. Now today, UGC is the body which is standing for standards in education, higher education, and also for funding. It is felt that there is a need for a distribution of power or a dichotomy that is to be developed between somebody who is funding and somebody who is setting standards. This understanding may be one of the strong reasons for making this as a separate, the funding arrangement separate. In any case, what is to be understood or what is to be internalized in India is the fact that the public funding is rather limited and is becoming a smaller segment of the total higher education expansion that is taking place in India. As I mentioned earlier, even if you reach 6% of the GDP and 2% of the GDP to be spent on higher education, I don't think that the state sector or the public exchequer will be able to play a very important dynamic role in terms of arranging or making the higher education processes and procedures move totally within the control of the government. The third dimension related to funding itself is that today we have a system of institutional funding to the institutions based on certain norms. But many a time during the crisis period, we are finding that the student funding is replacing institutional funding. This may be one of the dimensions of funding that will be taking place, because this funding vertical will be looking into student financing, scholarships, fellowships, and many other activities related to the student financing. In other words, what I mean to say is that two changes that I envisage is that even when the state is expanding or increasing or enhancing its share of public expenditure on higher education, it should not be misunderstood that the state will be in a position to provide adequate funding for the expansion of the higher education system. The way the expansion takes place and the way the social demand for higher education takes place is substantial, and therefore the state will not be able to meet this demand from the public exchequer. The second one, instead of funding the institutions, perhaps a major change may take place whereby the funding will be mostly through fellowships and scholarships to the students. Because if you look into the other higher education funding financing agency that was proposed in 2017 and 18, many of the institutions, especially for the infrastructure facilities, are in a position to take loans. Similarly, if you look into the RUSA 2013-14 onwards, you find that the infrastructure financing is through the public sector, especially to some of the institutions which are under its own control. So there is a difference that needs to be noticed. When you are expanding we are expecting that the funding mechanism will be changing from the institution to the individuals or the students. Perhaps there may not be substantial difference that will be made between students in the public institutions and students in the private institutions. This also, the financing mode or method will also be one of the ways in which we are bringing out a parity between public and private institutions in terms of funding. And if you are talking about student loans, this can be a system which can work very well without affecting or without increasing the burden of the public exchequer. So this is the fourth vertical is that in the general education council, which will be framing the learning outcomes and graduate attitudes. I should say that although unemployment is very high and unemployment of the educated is very high in India, this policy does not talk much about the unemployment of the educated. It, unlike the 1986 policy, where it talked about dealing with the increase from jobs. One of the reasons may be that this policy talks about graduate attributes and the employability of university graduates more significantly than unemployment or employment of the graduates. And as you know that globally it is predicted that many of the jobs that are existing now will be disappearing. And therefore, talking about the future of jobs and the future nature of jobs may be slightly premature. It may be realizing and recognizing the fact that it may not be possible for us to predict it with any degree of reliability or with any degree of confidence that what will be the nature of jobs that will be emerging. So therefore, one is talking about liberal arts education and strong technical professional education, also with a strong ground for liberal arts education, whereby one will be in a position to pick up social skills. One will be in a position to pick up, the skills which are very necessary and the skills which are very, very essential for talking about the changes that you are talking about. A third dimension again related to when you are talking about the quality of education or the curriculum, etc., which will be decided on the basis of the recommendations that will be made by the General Education Council, which was also what is called as National Skill Qualification Framework. This will be linking with employment. National Skill Qualification Framework is something that we accepted, that we had decided in 2013, and this has been brought out by the ministry. Now the question is that how do we link the National Skill Qualification Framework with the degrees that are awarded with higher education? That is why this is this policy is also talking about National Higher Education Qualification Framework, NEQF. That is very important, and that will decide the nature of jobs or the nature of skills that will be developed in the system. A fourth dimension to this issues related to curriculum and skill development in higher education is that instead of talking about vocational higher education, we are talking about vocationalization of higher education, whereby 50% of the students who are enrolled in higher education will be vocationally trained. So these are different ways in which we are trying to see that the graduate attributes are improved and the skills that are provided or the skills that are imparted through the educational system, not only to one set of students, but to the whole of the students who are undergoing education, whether in arts, humanities, sciences, technology, or professional degrees, will be getting liberal arts education, will be getting socialized to the skills which are necessary in the job market, and the competencies that are necessary in the job market are developed, irrespective of the job specific skills that we are talking about, This is a major change that we find. The fifth dimension, that is really a fifth point that I would like to say is that another way of managing another challenge for managing higher education system is also the question of internationalization efforts, which are mentioned in the policy. Say, for example, When we talk about internationalization, we also talk about mobility, student mobility, teacher mobility, mobility of courses like MOOCs courses, and also mobility of institutions. Of all these, teacher mobility and student mobility are traditional forms of mobility which existed. However, the institutional mobility is a new idea that has come into existence. And similarly, program mobility like MOOCs is also a new one. Now let me talk about the institutional mobility, which is one of the major interventions envisaged in the policy in the context of internationalization of higher education. India never permitted to have institutions to come, foreign institutions to come and establish branch campuses in India. They are not permitted to offer degrees or award degrees, offer courses and award degrees. Even joint degrees are not permitted in most of the subject areas as per the UGC regulations of 2016 and 17. Therefore, this is a major change. More importantly, we had a foreign providers bill in the parliament in the past century, past decade, in the previous decade, which could not be passed. As a result of that, that bill lapsed. Now we need to have a more understanding, a deeper understanding of the internationalization processes, basically divided into two parts. One, bringing students to India, and two, the nature of students who are going abroad. India sends around 3.1 lakh students. 3.1 lakh students, Indian students are studying abroad. They are mostly in the countries of United States, UK, and Australia. And very few students come to India. Only 47,000 students come to India. The students who are coming to India are mostly from the South Asian countries. Although India provides fellowships, although India levies a very low fees, although living conditions or cost of living is very less in India, India has not yet developed into an attractive place for students to come and stay here and take degrees. This is something that is very significant. How we can change this? And that is a significant part, and that is the important dimension that this policy is also talking about. And this is very important for a state like Kerala, because of the remittances, of the nearly 79 to 80 billion dollars remittance that are coming to India every year. A good share of it is coming from Keralites. And within Kerala, nearly 1/3 of the Kerala's state product, or state income is from remittances. And you find that a substantial number of Keralites are staying in Gulf countries, UK, USA, etc. We may not be able to attract in Kerala or to Kerala a large number of children of the families who are settled in Australia, UK, or USA, because they may prefer to have their own degrees. But we'll certainly will be able to attract a large number of students from the parents who are working in Gulf countries. And if you see the unaided, unrecognized English medium schools that are developed in Kerala in the last one and a half decades or 2 decades is an indication that the demand for this type of education, which can be encashed, which can be exchanged in the market value, is of high demand. And from that point of view, a degree from a foreign university will be also having a greater market value, and the parents will be in a position to spend money or invest money for it. They may not depend upon the state government to spend the money, but money can be mobilized from the households, and the money can be mobilized, or the budgets can be mobilized from the household and levied through the student fees. That is being done in many countries abroad, Or in other words, it may be a market-mediated, market principle-oriented internationalization, or in the form of a globalization of the institutions, and also offering of degrees and award of degrees will be offering of courses and award of degrees that will be taking place. This is an area where Kerala has a great role to play. Kerala will be a beneficiary if we plan it systematically and launch it. So this is very important dimension that you are talking about, because many of the Keralites are working abroad. and therefore an international degree and a familiarization with an international language will be to the advantage of Kerala students, and therefore it is very important to take this seriously. Friends, let me take another 4 to 5 minutes more to talk about how do we see the role of the state in the whole development of the higher education system in the country. As I mentioned earlier, we are talking about a system of development in this century or in this decade of development of higher education, whereby the partnership between the public and private has changed totally. Previously, it was a public sector dominated, state sector dominated higher education system that we are talking about. But today we are talking about a system which is dominated by the private sector. This is true in Kerala and this is true in many of the other states, you know. And therefore, we will not be able to see, I repeat the point that I made earlier, even if state funding is increased, this will not be, we will not be in a position to expand or enhance the level of funding to meet all the social demand for higher education. Therefore, it is very important to see that how do we design the programs and how do we ensure equity and quality in the provisions, and what will be the role of the state. In other words, my parting point will be that it is high time that we do not look at the state as a sole financier and sole funding agency, or for that matter, will be the state will be controlling beyond a point, you know. It will be more related to the rules and regulations to be framed, the guidelines that are provided. The state sets the tone for the operation of other institutions, including the private institutions. So it will play more of a facilitating role and a targeted funding role for the students coming from the socially deprived backgrounds and poor families and coming from the remote rural areas. Or in other words, what I am saying is that targeted funding and guidelines for operation of the institutions of higher education will be the way in which the state will be functioning and the state will be funding. This makes a lot of difference so far as the regulatory mechanisms are concerned. This makes a lot of difference so far as the governance issues are concerned. It is no longer an issue of public bodies or higher education controlled by the state, regulating the state institutions. It is more of a question of autonomy that is to be provided by institutions, whether it is private or public, having the similar set of rules governing public and private institutions. And more importantly, it is also important that the autonomy of the institution is maintained and retained. And that is where the policy talks about boards of management or boards of governance at the local level, which will be the body directly responsible for day-to-day management of higher education institutions. Friends, in other words, the policy talks about dramatic changes in many respects. Some of them are most welcome, which we may find immediately. Some of them are something which may take a little longer time. And this also requires a long-term perspective and intervention by the state governments. You know, one of the important dimensions to be remembered is that a new education policy is not a legal document. When I say that it's not a legal document, many of the recommendations contained in the policy requires legislation, which requires different forms of acts, and also it requires an understanding between central government and the state governments. And that is a way that you will be in a position to implement. That's a way that you'll be in a position to plan for implementation of higher education. You know. So, friends, to sum up, what I mean to say is that we are in a stage of massification and moving towards a stage of massification with a market-mediated or market-dominated private higher education system in the country and in the state. So therefore, the management and governance of higher education needs to be seen slightly more liberally and slightly more elaborated fashion, whereby we'll be in a position to see that the state plays a more facilitating role for all actors rather than taking the position of total funding and total control and total management of the institutions of higher education in India and in Kerala. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Professor N.V. Varghese, sir, respected Vice Chancellor, National Institute of Educational Planning and Administration, New Delhi, for your deliberations on governance of higher education in 2020. Thank you very much, sir. It is happy to inform you that our Honorable Vice Chancellor of Mahatma Gandhi University, Professor Sabu Thomas, sir, has joined our webinar. Invite Professor Sabu Thomas, sir, for delivering the inaugural address.
Very good morning to all of you. I'm extremely sorry for the delay because I had to deliver another inaugural address. So both came on the same time. Very, very sorry to our distinguished speaker, Professor Varghese, Honorable Vice Chancellor of NIPA, New Delhi, Professor Vasudha Kamath, Member National Education Policy Draft Committee, Professor Rana Chandran, Advisor, India Africa Institute of Education Planning Administration, Professor Sahu, Professor Chandra Bhushan Sharma, Professor Sudhir, Professor Ahmed, and all my colleagues, the head of the department, and Professor Tulsidaran, all the participants and delegates. Let me first wish you all the best for this national webinar on national education policy. Professor Varghese has given a wonderful lecture on the subject. And this topic is of great importance. We have organized a series of webinars and meetings on this subject. I'm sure all of you understand that the purpose of national education policy is transform millions of Indian people into global citizens. We all know that India is gifted with lots of young people. According to United Nations, 2025, the average age of an Indian person is going to be 29. That of China is 39, that of US is 40. Japan is close to 50. So we have lots of young people in this country. And they have to be trained well. They have to be equipped well. And if you can do that, I'm sure this country will be one of the best in the world. And if you critically look at the NEP policy, you will find that the enrollment ratio, the gross enrollment ratio, the dream point of gross enrollment ratio is 50. It's a very important point. So lots of young people, after school education, they could get into higher education. If you look at the gross enrollment ratio right now, it's around 24%. That is going to be increased to 50%. That's a very important point. Look at Korea. The gross enrollment ratio in Korea is close to 94%. Look at United States, it is 88%. Look at China, it is more than 50%. It's very important that gross enrollment ratio has to be increased. And if you look at, analyze the bill very carefully, you will find that the NEP, there is a provision for starting 4 years of bachelor's program. That is extremely nice with a lot of research embedded in this program. We are also going to start 4 years of teacher education policy, teacher education. So if you have 4 years of program, that will give lots of opportunities for the students for the horizontal growth and vertical growth. If you look at the US system, 4 years of program they have, bachelor's, so that an Indian student can easily go to US and do a master. And the fourth year, there are a lot of research components. And we are also going to start, the government is also going to start integrated program, 5 years of integrated program. Another positive aspect of, NEP is credit transfer and credit bank. This is fantastic. I can give an example. When I went to US as a Fulbright fellow, I've seen lots of Indian students at the University of Pennsylvania. They have studied their 2 years of bachelor's in MIT. MIT fee is very high, so then they have come to UPenn, University of Pennsylvania, with all the credits they got in MIT could be transferred to University of Pennsylvania. So the credit transfer is giving lots of opportunity for the students to go around. Credit bank, whatever credits you achieve, it could be stored in the bank, then you can use it anytime. And government has a plan to transfer all our institutions into multidisciplinary institutions. For example, IITs are meant for engineering and technology. But if this NEP is implemented, you will have social sciences, you have humanities, languages going to be strong in IITs. And they're going to give greater autonomy for the colleges. Good colleges will be transformed into sort of autonomous colleges. If you're not doing well, you could be some sort of college under the university, phasing out of affiliation process. That's also quite interesting. And if you look at the national education policy, you will find that the government plans to use 6% of GDP for education. That is something very interesting. 6% of GDP for education is something very, 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 very interesting process. And I hope that there will be substantial increase for research too. And government is also planning to start National Research Foundation, NRF. If you look at US, they have NSF, National Science Foundation. If you look at Germany, they have, there are lots of programs. They have DAD, they have DFG, there are lots of funding. So government is going to start National Research Foundation. South Africa also has the same name. And I hope that will strengthen our research. And I hope that government will channelize lots of funding through NRF. Similarly, they are also going to introduce national mentoring program. There will be a portal for mentoring. Senior professors, retired professors, senior citizens can register in that portal. And these people will mentor, colleges. These people will mentor young faculty members. That is again quite interesting. So there are lots of good aspects in the new education policy. But I would say that this has to be implemented in close consultation with the state government. The education is actually concurrently. So we need to have lots of interaction with the state government, and this should be implemented in strong cooperation with the state government. Similarly, the national education policy says that interaction between philanthropists, interaction between private and public institutions, that's also extremely nice. I remember when I went to US, I've gone to many universities, and many universities, you can see that there are lots of funding from philanthropists. I think we should get lots of funding from philanthropists, from other agencies. Therefore, there should be a lot of interaction between private and public. And as a result of this, lots of funding would be channelized. And I request that in the seminar, there should be very good discussion. Personally, I like conference and meetings. When you attend a conference and a meeting, you understand the latest advancement of the subject. You meet the stalwarts. Professor Varghese has given an excellent talk. I listened to this Professor Varghese talk partly while sitting in my laboratory. Professor Varghese has given an excellent talk. So you understand really the subject very well. So I request all the participants to be very active, ask questions to the experts, and understand the subject very well. And I request the organizers after the conference, you should come out with a document. As a result of this conference, you prepare a document, and this could be submitted to the central government as well as the state government. Let our suggestions be incorporated in this document policy. This is still a policy, and now Parliament has to approve. The President has to give assent. Therefore, lots of modification could be incorporated. So, with all your permission, I declare that the national education policy, webinar on national education policy has been inaugurated, and I wish all the best and all success for the conference.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks a lot to Professor Varghese for spending this much of time with us. Thank you, Professor Varghese. Thank you. And Professor Varghese, visit us sometime to our campus after the pandemic.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Honorable Vice Chancellor of Mahatma Gandhi University, Professor Sabu Thomas. Inspiring inaugural address. Thank you, sir. Now we move to the address, special address by Honorable Vasudha Kamath Madam, Member National Education Policy 2020 Draft Committee and a former Vice Chancellor, SNDT Women's University, Mumbai. Professor Vasudha Kamath Madam will talk on restructuring of higher education institutions for holistic and multidisciplinary education. Welcome, ma'am. Professor Vasudha Kamath, please.
Sabu Thomas, Professor Varghese, all the officials of various departments of Mahatma Gandhi University and expert participants who are deeply interested in understanding and implementing national education policy at their institutional level, state level, as well as contribute to the national level implementation. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I was enlightened by Professor Varghese's session he touched upon various aspects of policy, and thereby actually my work is now lessened because I had planned some of those things. So he has already touched upon it. What I will do, I will use a presentation, and for that I will switch off my video. So, are you able to see this?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Because I am co-host, these things will keep coming. People will keep joining. Okay. My topic is restructuring of higher education institutions. I will try to be completing this by 12:5. The vision of this policy is to provide high quality education to all. You all know that 21st century learners have a very different aspirations from what we had, my generation and next generation. This is a very special millennial generation, and in order to satisfy, address this policy is developed for that. And I am very happy that this policy addresses the aspirations of 21st century learners to have high quality education. The policy envisions develop a deep sense of respect towards fundamental rights, duties, and constitutional values. What happens, we always ask a question, what my country is doing for me? But we should also see what am I doing for my country? That is also equally important. So we should be having youth who are conscious about their own role and responsibility in this changing world. Professor Varghese also referred to internationalization, and global citizenship policy envisions that too. It has a foundation of access, equity, quality, affordability, and accountability. These are 5 pillars of national education policy. There are many key principles listed by the policy. Some of these are here. Emphasis on conceptual understanding. We will also be thinking about implementing in your university. So the curriculum will also be required to be changed, transformed. Change is not the word. This policy is a transformative policy. So it talks about emphasis on conceptual understanding, not memorization. It talks about critical thinking and creativity, not only in higher education, but it starts right from school education. So school education curriculum also will foster this. Fostering the unique capabilities of each student. See, we have about 50, 100, 150 students sitting in front of us, and the teacher talks. So what we do, we generally talk to an average student who is not there in the class. Now this policy tells you that each student has unique capabilities And now you have technology, you have different pedagogies, we will come to that a little later, but try to foster each student's capability. Respect for diversity and local context, equity and inclusion, continuous review. If you have to make progress, you have to stop, review, take stock, and then see how you want to make changes so that you can go there faster. Community participation is a very important key principle of this policy because it says right from school days, it says bagless days. Why bagless days? It asks the students to go to their village, to their town, understand what is the society, and then participate in their development later on. An extensive use of technology. The objective of higher education is personal accomplishment and enlightenment. We are talking about youth from 18 to 24. They come here for personal accomplishment and enlightenment. But equally important are next to constructive public engagement. He or she should not be thinking only about himself or herself. Think about others outside themselves, outside their families. Think about public engagement and productive contribution to the society. It must prepare students for more meaningful and satisfying lives, work roles, and enable economic independence. This is very important, economic independence. But that is not the sole objective. You may earn a lot of money, big packages, we read that. But what do you do for others? That is equally important. This is what this policy tells you. If you take an overview, Professor Varghese has already said this. It talks about large, well-resourced, multidisciplinary institutions. It doesn't talk about in a college with 50 or 75 students. It talks about more than 3,000 students on campus, well-resourced and multidisciplinary, where you have flexible curricular structure, where you have multiple entry and exit points, and also very creative combination of studies. In addition to that, it says higher education will include professional education, vocational education, and teacher education. Today, they are all separate. They won't say we have higher education. So higher education is only UG and PG. It's not so. Vocational education should form a part of school education as well as higher education. We will see it later. It talks about multidisciplinary higher education institutions. It talks about two types of HEI. One is university and other is autonomous degree granting colleges. So university means a multidisciplinary institution of higher learning that offers undergraduate, graduate, and also research as well as PhD programs. Whereas autonomous degree granting colleges, which refers to multidisciplinary institution where more emphasis is given on undergraduate degrees. So it's not that they will not have postgraduate program, they will, but their major work will be for undergraduate degrees. Here, it's not only autonomous college, it says autonomous degree granting colleges. So they, in some time to come, in 5-6 years, they will start giving degrees on their own. If you see this, it's a universities, two types of universities, research intensive university and teaching intensive university. That doesn't mean that university only does research, it is research intensive. So it will also do teaching, but more emphasis on research. And teaching intensive means greater emphasis on teaching. But a large part will be autonomous degree granting colleges. And for this, UGC will have to change their act because today no college can offer a degree, only universities can offer a degree. Only in India and nearby countries, we have affiliating system. Very few countries in the world. Affiliating one university affiliates so many colleges and the university gets bogged down by continuously developing curriculum, conducting exam, giving the results, and there is no time for more productive, progressive, innovative, creative work. So this policy says do away with, phase out affiliating system, let each college be autonomous. Universities are already autonomous, so greater autonomy be given to colleges by 2035. In the next 15 years, all colleges should go to NAC and get themselves accredited. A college can either be autonomous degree granting college or it can be a constituent college of a university. Then their management, it's not a private management or any other. University manages that. And that doesn't mean that they have to be on their campus. For example, SNDT Women's University has colleges which are constituent colleges outside the campus. So it is possible, but they are managed by the university. See, you may be surprised. Out of 993 universities we have today, 290, that means nearly 300 universities are affiliating universities. But the college number is 38,179. This is given by the All India Survey of Higher Education, 1890. But we have only 747 autonomous colleges. See, if all colleges need to become autonomous, we have to go a long way. Degree granting colleges means they will be autonomous first, and they will increase their autonomy to such an extent, their quality of every activity to such an extent, that they can start giving their degrees. So they should be encouraged, mentored, supported, and incentivized to gradually attain minimum benchmark. So then they can start giving degrees. Later on, they also can become universities, research intensive or teaching intensive. There is no hard and fast wall in between. So tomorrow that degree granting autonomous college can become university. A multidisciplinary HEI by 2040, all university colleges should become multidisciplinary institutions. And large means the student strength must be more than 3,000. Now, if you see today, out of 38,179 colleges, only 1,536 colleges, that is 4% colleges, have strength more than 3,000. 96% don't have. We have many colleges which have less than 500 strength. And another 1,500 is for 2,000 to 3,000. So we have to go a long way. So what it says, suddenly you can't be degree granting. First, become multidisciplinary, then students will come. So increase your student strength, show the quality, and then become degree granting. The policy plans that in every district or near every district, there will be a very, like IITs, multidisciplinary education and research university will be either established or the university already there that will be enhanced, developed further. I think there is no need to develop more universities because we already have enough institutions. Vice Chancellor Professor Thomas also spoke about GER, and Professor Varghese also spoke about GER. Today, the GER is 26.3, and within next 15 years, we want to make it 50%. But it says that this will also include vocational education, and this will also include enrollment in open and distance learning. So a large part of capacity creation will be achieved not only by establishing new institutions, but consolidating, substantially expanding, and also improving existing HIs. I want to speak something more about what the universities can do at their own level. So multidisciplinary education refers to 4 aspects: curriculum, pedagogy, assessment, and student support. The goal should be to develop all aspects and capabilities, not only cognitive, but emotional development, physiological development is also very important. So to make education more well-rounded, useful, and fulfilling to the learner. It should build character, enable learners to be ethical, rational, compassionate, and caring. You see, I really get surprised that I come from education technology and I'm interested how people develop their curricula. There are no objectives written. Without writing objectives, we only write content. What do we do with that content is not known to teacher, is not known to the students. See, if you identify what this curriculum wants to develop, inculcate, or help the students to develop the ethical, rational, compassionate, and caring attitude. The curriculum is developed by the universities. As I said, generally it is full of content. Huh? Now the content becomes obsolete. Why do we want to give more emphasis on content which is not useful, which cannot be applied? So the policy says the curriculum should be multidisciplinary. Suppose somebody wants to do BSc in physics, so that person has to study physics and chemistry or physics and maths, no other subject. When I did my BSc in chemistry, I wanted to learn music, I wanted to learn Bharatanatyam. So they said nothing doing. You are only studying physics and chemistry and botany zoology. These are the three subjects you have taken, only study those. Now this policy says there is no hard separation between arts and science, between curricular and extracurricular activities, between vocational and academic streams. So it says you can include many subjects: humanities, sports, language, culture, basic art. Does that mean that if you have 140 credits, everything can be included and 4 credit you study 60 courses? No. If you are doing BSc with physics, give a major part will be physics, but other part can be other subject which the student is interested in. So universities now should think about developing curriculum which doesn't have walls in between. Similarly, the curriculum is transacted with pedagogy. We should stop our teacher-centric pedagogy. Teacher goes to class, use PowerPoint presentation and talks. All day, teacher talks. Even in teacher training, the expert talks. Instead of that, learner-centered and learning-centered pedagogy should be used. In education technology, we really emphasize these kind of pedagogies, which are cooperative learning, collaborative learning, flexible learning, flipped learning, integrated learning. So we must learn this. Teachers must learn this, not to speak continuously, be at the backside of the stage and let the students do collaborative work, cooperative work, make presentation, create knowledge, find out the problems in the society, come back to college and then again address those. It also says, this policy also says the assessment should change. Today, if you analyze any question paper, 95% of questions are based on memory. We should stop that. The policy categorically tells us again and again that we should move away from memorization. The information becomes obsolete. So at the university level, if you want to implement something, think about changing your assessment. The moment you change your assessment, instead of having semester end assessment, you can have continuous comprehensive assessment. Plan for that. There are many things, portfolios are there, peer evaluation is there, many new trends in assessment have come. So it doesn't mean that you give them something to write, essay, and you keep correcting. No. Problem solving.
Ma'am, your voice is blurred.
Huh? Are you saying something?
Ma'am,
So,
your voice is not proper.
Is it?
Ma'am.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So if you change your assessment strategies, that will reflect on your pedagogy. If assessment is only checking memorized thing, then you will only lecture. But if assessment is what you can do, where you can apply, how you analyze a given system, how you evaluate a project, how you create something new, then you will not be asking him who said, when he said, where he said. These kind of questions will totally go out of your question paper. That is why I am saying that this policy talks about innovativeness, creativity, understanding, concept. Conceptual understanding is very important than memorization. So think about this in university level if you want to do that. Professor Varghese spoke about NHEQF, National Higher Education Qualification Framework, and National Skill Qualification Framework. Now, the policy is suggesting reorganization of the governance structure, and it suggests GEC, General Education Council, that General Education Council should develop this qualification framework, graduate attributes, and universities must know what they are trying to do with these 21st century learners. We use CBCS, choice-based credit system, but very mechanically. We really have to enhance, think twice, and expand this CBCS in much more meaningful way. And effective pedagogical practices, I already said. Student support, faculty and institutions must have autonomy to develop their curriculum, to develop their use their pedagogy, develop their assessment mechanism in a broad framework. Policy suggests that every institution should have a development plan, but all teachers' academic plans also need to be incorporated in that. But it also continuously says, think about quality and provide high quality support to every student. It says global standard of quality should be adhered to. One more very important thing is flexibility brought in by this policy. It talks about multiple entry, multiple exit, or only exiting and then be satisfied with the diploma. Today, a student comes here to the 3-year program, and she has to leave after 1 year for some reason. She has already done 40 credits, but we just don't give any credit to her because she has dropped out. This policy says give a certificate of that. If she drops out after 2 years, give a diploma. See, but what happens? Your curriculum should be designed in such a way that when she goes out, she can make use of that certificate. That certificate should be meaningful. In our education technology department in SNDT Women's University, if the student drops out after first semester, she gets a certificate of the 20 credits of instructor-led training. After 2 semesters, she gets a PG diploma. So like that, the curriculum is organized in such a way that if they drop out, after that, they will be able to use those credits. But if they want to come back, the policy suggests academic bank of credit, ABC. The student has to open an account like a bank account and put the credits there. But once the credits are used, the student says, now I want to take a degree out of it. So those credits will not be used again. It talks about 3 years degree, but it says that move towards 4 years degree, multidisciplinary bachelor degree. If that 4 years degree is done, then master's degree can be done in 1 year. If 3 years degree, then master's will be 2 years. But if the 4-year degree, the last year is done research based on the content which he has taken, or the concept topics she has taken, then after 4 years, he or she can directly get admission to PhD. See the kind of flexibility, the master's program, 5 years master's program, graduate and master's together, B.Ed, 4-year integrated B.Ed. So many permutations, combinations suggested. So universities, I request your university, if you want to implement something at your level, you need not wait for state government and national government, central government to say something. Many things you can start doing at your level. Many things. So because you are autonomous. So think about it. Bring in a lot of flexibility. You can set up startup incubation center, technology development center, centers in frontier areas of research. So today what is happening? One topic is selected, all 25 students are doing research on the same topic, which is of no use. No use. Because it really doesn't address real problem of the society. I mean, just refer to hackathon. How hackathon is done? Real problems are identified by the ministries, more than 500. And students address those problems, find out solutions to them. Why can't we do that with sociology students, with biology students, with physics students? Develop greater industry academic linkages. For internship, this will be very useful. Conduct interdisciplinary research in humanities and social science. Professor Varghese has already spoken, so I have only one slide because I was not going to speak about governance. He was speaking about it. But the principle of functional separation. Today what is happening, 1 or 2 institutions are governing everything. I don't know really governing. But now this policy has separated functions. All 4 functions are separated. See, the NAC Governing Council chairperson is chairperson of UGC. It should not happen like this. So now UGC will become HEGC, Higher Education Grants Council. NAC will become National Accreditation Council. And there will be only one regulatory council, National Higher Education Regulatory Council. And I refer to General Education Council, which will develop graduate attributes and framework. There are many, about 17 councils, medical council, nursing council, architect council, bar council, and so many. So they are regulatory councils. This policy says, except medical and bar council, all other councils will become professional standard setting bodies. They will only set the standards and they will become members of GEC so that they can suggest, because ultimately universities are developing their programs and giving the degrees, not these councils. So if university is giving the degree, then let university decide what they want to give. But PSSB should guide GEC for setting up the standards. So they become standard setting bodies. NRF, Professor Sabu Thomas, Vice Chancellor, has already referred to that. I am really looking forward to it because it will be an independent body. You see, we are spending only 0.69% of GDP, and South Korea is spending 4.2. Israel is such a small country, spending 4.3. So we should really address our research requirements and needs. So this will be set up, and I'm sure MOE, Ministry of Education, is taking steps for setting up NRF very soon. The work of NRF is not only to give funding for science and technology research. It is going to give research funding for all disciplines, even sociology, social science, and natural sciences both. But basically, they will create linkages between researchers, government, and industry. Vocational education should become a part of school education and higher education. You can see it here, very pathetic situation, 19 to 24-year-olds in India. You can see in USA, 52% of these young people are already introduced to workforce. Germany 75%, South Korea 96%, in India only 5%. We are not introduced any vocational because we think vocational education is second grade citizenship. It is a blue collar job. It is not so. It is not so. And that is why this policy says vocational education should form a part of higher education. You can design courses, 4 credit courses, 8 credit courses on different vocations, and students can select those and get a degree as a part of your BSc, BA, BCom degrees. I think I will stop here. They have a ministry, they say 25%, but policy has said by 2025, in the next 5 years, 50% learners through school and higher education system should have exposure of vocational education. They are really working on it. Really. I thank you. I thank the organizers for inviting me to share some of my thoughts. I think we need not wait for state government and central government to give us their, yes, some of the things, as Professor Varghese, legislation change is there. Some acts will be prepared. But at our level, at a university level, whatever we can do, we should start doing. We should not be waiting for others to guide us, because universities are autonomous. Autonomous colleges, the autonomy is there in their name. So, autonomy and start working. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Vasudha ma'am, for such a wonderful talk on restructuring of higher education institutions for holistic and multidisciplinary education. Thank you, ma'am. Participants, now it is a time for discussion. You are welcome. You can unmute yourself and you can interact with the resource persons now. Participants, please.
I will be here only up to 12:15. I will have to leave by 12:15.
Okay.
There are some questions they have asked in chat.
Yeah.
But mostly it is thank you to me.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, please.
Audible?
Please speak.
Am I audible? Hello.
Yes, you are audible. Please proceed.
My question is, what about this NEP policy impact on engineering education? NEP policy, how it impact in engineering education?
Okay. Dr. K.S. Kiran asking that how national the effect on engineering education.
Education, teacher education today, they are not multidisciplinary institutions. They only run engineering program. There are, see, IITs have started departments like sociology, psychology. So general engineering colleges are secluded. There are technology universities also. They teach only technological subjects, whereas multidisciplinary, every university will become multidisciplinary. Even Sanskrit University will become multidisciplinary. Every college will have to be multidisciplinary college. So engineers, do they not require any human-related subjects? Do they not require to understand their society, the psychology of people, the economics of people? They do, but they are never taught. Similarly, medical students are also not taught many subjects which in later life they have to learn on their own. So this policy says make every institution multidisciplinary institution. So they will have to start new departments, new centers, new schools. Yeah, I think day before on 31st we had a meeting at MOE level, and engineering, I mean technical people are thinking that they may not go out after 1 year. They can leave after 2 years and then they can get certain credits for that, but it's going on. But all engineering programs should become 4-year programs. And in these 4 years, they should be able to learn. If the student, now for example, one of our members from draft committee, Professor Manjul Bhargav, he is a field awardee. It's like a Nobel Award in mathematics. He's a mathematician. But he is a very good tabla player. He says that whenever he has a problem, he leaves that problem there and he starts playing tabla. See, recreation, mind, brain does get tired. But we don't allow the brain to just go here and there. Just concentrate on it. It doesn't work. So policy is saying, give your brain and heart and hand equal weightage. And that's why even engineering colleges will not remain separated, secluded. They will also have to become nursing college, only nursing college, law college, only law college. If you have now university, all these universities and colleges will have to become multidisciplinary. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ma'am, one small. Hello, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am. Hello, ma'am. Yes, I just had a query. Now they will be, according to this new NEP, 9th, 10th, and 11th, 12th will be collaborated. So, in terms of infrastructure, how will this faculty from 9th, 10th will be promoted to 11th, 12th in regards with infrastructure basis?
Things are not going to be next day. People immediately, email box was flooded. What are you closing this boards, SSC boards, HSC boards? No, not tomorrow. They will first plan. They will then train teachers. They will set up infrastructure, and we don't want a chaos. So that is why SSC gives time for everything. You should do this. This should be done in 10 years. This should be done in 15 years, and the policy should be implemented in totality from 2020 to 2040. That is what is envisaged.
Okay, ma'am. Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
So I think I will take your leave now. Thank you so much once again for inviting me.
Thank you, ma'am. Professor N.V. Wagi, sir. Hello, sir.
Yes.
Sir Ismail Tamrasheri, Assistant Professor, School of Pedagogical Sciences, Mahatma Gandhi University. In
Uh-huh.
your talk, you said that it is the time of massification of higher education. In this massification of higher education, private players play a major role. But in Kerala, Kerala government policy always they turn against or not in favor of entry of private players in higher education. Then massification of higher education then will not happen in Kerala.
Sorry, I think there is a need for explanation. Can you hear me?
Yes, 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 sir.
Yes, sir.
Massification is a stage in the development and progress of higher education. The stage of massification is gross enrollment ratio crossing 15%, 1-5, and less than 50, 50. That is the stage of massification. With the 26% GER, India is now in a state of massification. My point was that the fast expansion of this sector in this century is the result of proliferation of private institutions, especially private universities. The private universities were permitted in India only from 2002 onwards. So that was my point. And if you are talking about Kerala, Kerala has a large number of private institutions, higher education institutions, not universities, like what you find in Rajasthan or Uttar Pradesh or Madhya Pradesh, etc. So you have a large number of universities. But in any case, 82% of the total higher education students in Kerala are in the private institutions. Say, for example, if you take in Kerala, district like Kottayam, district like Ernakulam, or district like Trichur, you take these three districts have largest share of higher education institutions and concentration in Kerala. And most of these institutions are private, not government. And if you see after 1956-57, if you see the expansion of higher education and the public sector higher education in Kerala, one find that firstly there was an increase or an expansion up to 1982-83. After that, the public sector did not expand much. It is mostly the private higher education institutions that expanded. Secondly, even when the public institutions expanded, immediately after the formation of the state, most of these public institutions were established in the Malabar region because that region was more backward when compared with the Travancore or Cochin region. So it is not true to say that there is no private sector in Kerala. In fact, the average in Kerala for the enrollment in private sector is much higher than what you find as average in all India level, which is only 66%. But in Kerala, it is around 82%. That's the difference.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Hello. Good afternoon, sir.
Yes, please go ahead.
Sir, I would like to ask, sir.
Please introduce yourself.
I am Dr. Shai. I have completed my PhD in education from MG University, Kottayam.
Okay.
School of Pedagogical Sciences.
Go ahead.
Sir, again, I am asking you, you have said that higher education institutions are coming in private sector.
Sorry?
NEP ensure equitable education. So, how does it affect the underrepresented groups? Because they are very poor and they are not able to afford the fees and all other procedures coming in this private sector, especially in fees. So, how can we ensure equity?
That is what I. Sorry, Shaija finished? Did you finish your question?
Sir, please answer this.
So let me say that there are two issues. One is expansion of the system. The second is expansion of the system with equity. Now, when the state is playing the role, the expansion is at an affordable cost and it is benefiting all the sections, including the disadvantaged groups. When the private sector is the dominant partner in expansion, it is a market process and the fee levels are high, and therefore one is not in a position to make use of these opportunities and avenues if your income levels are low and if you come from a remote rural area. That is the case. That is where the state has to intervene. How will the state intervene? That's why I talked in my presentation that one may move towards student financing. Students from the socially disadvantaged groups will be given scholarships and fellowships, or in other words, the limited public funding will be targeted more towards the students from the socially and economically disadvantaged groups. That is how you talk about equity. This is one dimension of the equity so far as entry is concerned. Then another form of equity is that in terms of learning outcomes, that depends upon how do we organize the teaching learning activities within an institution. Where you find that the institutional head, the institutional leadership, and the teachers have a lead role to play. It is not the institution or it is not the government. It is not a relationship that is to be analyzed between the government and the institution. Within the institution, how do we try to organize the classes? Say, for example, today, language is a major issue in higher education. And if I exaggerate a little bit, I will say that there is no language in which curriculum can be transacted in many higher education institutions. Because many students come from regional languages who are studied at the school level in the regional languages. And when they come to the higher education system, the transaction is perhaps in English. And what you find is that many of the students are not in a position to fare well, understand well, and fare well. There are institutions in India where they try to provide compensatory education in terms of the language education, even in the beginning. Say, for example, 73% of the students who are studying at the secondary level in the private institutions are in the English medium schools, whereas only the same percentage, the corresponding percentage, is only 38 to 39% in the public institutions. And if you go to the public institutions, in many time in Kerala today, you find that the public institutions or the government colleges are focusing more on humanities, social sciences, and arts. And these disciplines are more filled in by students from the poor socio-economic background. So there is a need to look into these dimensions. So I am talking about two things. One, how to bring students to the colleges and universities, and how to make education more affordable. I said that fellowships and scholarships will be useful. Two, the public funding should be more targeted towards them rather than an indiscriminate spending of resources. Three, we may be moving from an institutional funding mechanisms and financing of higher education to individual based or a student support systems. These are the things that I mentioned. These are the issues which are important to bring the students to the colleges and universities. Now they face a lot of problem. So if you are talking about equality or egalitarian principles extended to learning outcomes, it becomes very important that these students are given special compensatory education so that they are in a position to compete equally with the students coming from better socio-economic background from English medium schools and also with a lot of resources from home, you know. I don't mean money alone, you know, but the intellectual capital resources from home, you know. That is why we talk about equality, egalitarian principle, both from the financing point of view and from the academic point of view and from the social point of view. Thank you.
Professor T. Tulasidaran?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Sir.
sir.
Yes, Kurian CC, please proceed.
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
I am Kujan CC. I am working as an assistant professor in the St. Thomas College of Teacher Education, Mailakum. Shall I ask my doubt? Sir?
Yes, please. Go ahead, Kurian. Nice
Yes.
to listen to you.
Yes, in the policy it is mentioned that all the teacher education institutions shall be converted as multidisciplinary institutes. While we are thinking about this aspect, how is it possible? How these standalone single teacher education colleges can provide the sufficient infrastructure facilities and other such things? Is it possible? How? I think it is very difficult thing to convert all these teacher education institutions as multidisciplinary institutes. That is my doubt.
Madam Masuda, would you like to answer or should I go ahead?
No, Madam has left.
Oh, I see. So then let me take up
Yes.
Dr. Kurian. Nice to
Yes, sir.
listen to you. Okay. We have impacted so much and I am happy that you are still active.
Yes, sir.
Now let me
Thank
say
you.
that let me take this issue that you know this is one of the major issue. I touched upon these two dimensions. One, single discipline institutions are come up, and many of these institutions are in the private sector, making them again into multidisciplinary is not an easy task. There are two
Yes,
types
sir.
of difficulties. Firstly, the infrastructure facilities, the teachers to be provided, and also the facilities and compounds and compound and the building, etc. You know, those type of issues. One. The second issue relates to the recruitment of the teachers and their deployment. The third one is that these are not public institutions. So how can the public bodies insist that these colleges will be made multidisciplinary by spending money from your side? Because many private institutions may not be happy to invest money in teaching history, in teaching, say for example, philosophy, because the students who are ready to come may not be ready to pay fees. They may not get a large number of students. And even if they come, they are not ready to pay fees. Like if you introduce a course like economics or commerce or something related to computer, etc., which are more employment oriented. So there is really a problem of one is academic, the other is financial dimensions. And what is the incentive to make it multidisciplinary by the private agencies? There may not be. And this is the challenge. That is why I was talking about some of these changes may take a very long period of time. Even when 10+2 system was introduced at all India level as per the 1968 policy, Government of Kerala adopted this only in 1990. It took 22 years. So therefore, this multidisciplinary orientation, I find very difficult to come through all of a sudden. It will continue like this and slowly but systematically it may move to the college. One of the reasons why we talk about minimum enrollment of 3,000 is also because it becomes multidisciplinary. In a single discipline, you will not get 3,000 students pursuing B.Ed courses or any of these courses, you know. with a single discipline. So once you make it multidisciplinary, there are possibilities that the number of students will be going up. So I don't think that it will come through very fast. It will take time. It has a lot of financial investment, and also there should be some incentive for the private sector to invest.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Now we are moving to the end of the today's
Session.
webinar. I invite Honorable Professor T.V. Tulasidaran sir, the mastermind behind the program, to deliver the concluding remarks and vote of thanks. Sir, please.
Okay, thank you. Respected Chair of this session, Professor Minikuti, Head of the Department, School of Pedagogical Sciences. Honorable Vice Chancellor, Mahatma Gandhi University, Professor Sabu Thomas, sir. Esteemed resource persons, Professor N.V. Varghese, sir, Honorable Vice Chancellor, National University of Education, Planning and Administration, New Delhi, Professor Vasudha Kamath, National Education Policy 2020 Draft Committee member and former Vice Chancellor, SNDT University, Women's University, Mumbai, faculty members of the School of Pedagogical Sciences, dear participants from various parts of the country, a very good afternoon to you all. I am Professor Dr. T.V. Tulasidaran, the general convener of this webinar. I am entrusted with the proposed vote of thanks for this session. Let me enter into my duty. I am so happy to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Sabu Thomas, sir, the dynamic Vice Chancellor of our university. He is a propelling force behind all this to organize this webinar. Thank you so much for your kindfulness to inaugurate this webinar, even in the midst of his hectic schedule. And we are also thankful for your enlightened inaugural address. While inaugurating the session, he has mentioned about the gross enrollment rate and the young population of India, significance of young population of India. And also, once again, I thankful to our Vice Chancellor, Dr. Sabu Thomas, sir, for their enlightening words. Friends, today we are privileged with two eminent personalities as our resource persons, Professor N.V. Varghese, sir, and Vasudha Kamath, madam. Professor Varghese, sir, Vice Chancellor of National University of Education, Planning and Administration, New Delhi. Sir, we are all thankful to you for your esteemed presence and excellent keynote address in the webinar on the topic National Education Policy 2020 in the context of broader linking issues related to the governance. In his talk, he has mentioned the various aspects of the governance, starting with expansion of higher education system, institutional consolidation, regulatory bodies, then higher education grants committee, different curricular bodies, functioning of the institutes, and so on. And at the meantime, he has mentioned that it is the policy is a tight but a tight regulation, and he has mentioned some other features of the national education policy, and we are also thankful to you on behalf of School of Mahatma Gandhi University, School of Pedagogical Sciences. I extend a very warm, I extend our sincere gratitude to you, sir, on this occasion. Today, our special address, we are extremely happy and fortunate that Professor Vasudha Kamath, National Education Policy 2020 member draft committee and the former Vice Chancellor of SNDT Women's University, Mumbai, has graciously accepted our invitation and make the special address on the topic restructuring of higher education institutions for holistic and multidisciplinary education. Yes, I am sure that we have learned a very lot, very new ideas regarding the reconstruction of higher education institution for the holistic and the multidisciplinary education. And he has concerned, he has touched almost all the aspects of the higher education system. We are all thankful to you for your enlightened lecture. On behalf of Mahatma Gandhi University School of Pedagogical Sciences and on behalf of me, I extend a very warm, very sincere gratitude to Madam on this function. I extend a sincere thanks to our head of the department, Professor Minikuti, for all her support and motivation for the successful conduct of this webinar. I extend a very sincere gratitude to our organizing committee member, convener Dr. Sajjana Jalil, Associate Professor, School of Pedagogical Sciences, organizing secretary, Sri Ismail Tamarsheri, the coordinators, Dr. Muhammad Kevi and Sibuji Netto, Assistant Professor, School of Pedagogical Sciences, organizing committee members, Professor Jaya Jace and Professor Asha Jevi, the rapporteur, Anu Cletus, at the moreover, I take this opportunity to thank all the participants from the various parts of the country. Actually, you are the backbone of this program. Let me express my sincere gratitude to all the participants and the supporting staff members of the university and all other members, those who are directly or indirectly helping to conduct for the smooth conduct of this webinar. Once again, and thanks to all the members for this successful completion of this webinar. Thank you all. Thank you. Ismail. Hello.
I can sign off.
Hello.